Welcome to a quiet night of ghostly tales. As the world slows down, we'll drift through haunted places and restless spirits, carried softly by stories meant to guide you into sleep. Do you believe ghosts are echoes of the past, or something still watching us now? Let me know your thoughts, and together, let's step into the whispers of the unknown. There's a sound that belongs to no living traveler. It begins faintly, as if far down a forgotten lane, the faint clatter of wheels against cobblestone, the dull rhythm of hooves that echo through the mist. You might think it's a distant cart or the late return of a carriage from town, yet when you lean closer to the silence, the air itself changes. The night grows heavier, colder, and the sound grows near until it feels as though something unseen is passing right beside you. For centuries, stories of ghostly carriages have haunted lonely roads. They are said to appear at midnight, pulled by horses as black as shadows, their harnesses ringing with hollow metal. Some describe flickering lanterns swinging from the sides, glowing not with firelight, but with a pale, otherworldly blue. No driver is seen, only the outline of a figure cloaked in darkness. To witness such a sight, the elders used to say, is to stand at the edge of the living world. In Ireland, it is called the Cóiste Bodhar, the death coach. Its arrival is not just a vision, but a warning. The sound of its wheels means someone nearby is about to die. They say the coach moves without touching the ground, gliding over rivers and walls, pulled by headless horses that breathe smoke instead of air. And seated high upon the driver's bench is a headless man, holding a whip made of human spine. When the coach halts before a house, no prayer can keep death from entering. Across the sea in Wales, people once spoke of a similar vision known as the Gwrach Rhibyn, a shrieking spirit who sometimes followed the coach, wailing for the soul it came to claim. In the English countryside, villagers whispered of the black coach, a spectral vehicle drawn by 4 horses whose eyes glowed like burning coals. Even the American colonies carried echoes of these stories, brought over by settlers who remembered the dread of those midnight roads. In the 1800s, newspapers occasionally printed reports from travelers who claimed to have seen such things. One man wrote that while returning home through a storm, he heard the pounding of hooves behind him, though no horse could be seen. He turned again and again, but the noise followed him until he reached a crossroads. There a shadow passed before his lantern light, a coach with no form, only the faint shimmer of glass and a flicker of light within. By morning, the man had fallen ill. Within a week, he was dead. Sometimes the coach appears not as a threat, but as a vision of sorrow. In one old story, a woman waiting by her window for her husband's return saw a coach stop outside her home. She ran to open the door, certain he had come back early, but found only empty air and the faint smell of damp earth. The next day, a messenger arrived bearing tragic news. Her husband had died on the road the night before, at the very hour she heard the carriage pass. There are countless variations, each told with its own details, yet always the same heart. The echo of motion where none should be. The sense that something is traveling through the veil between life and death. Some say these carriages were once real, belonging to noble families or mourners who carried the dead to burial grounds centuries ago. Perhaps their roots became cursed, replaying endlessly through the years. Others believe the coaches are made of pure spirit, built by death itself to collect wandering souls who cannot find rest. Late-night wanderers tell of standing still in the darkness, hearing wheels roll over gravel though no light appears. The sound passes by as though time itself bends around it, leaving behind only a chill wind and the faint scent of rain. Horseshoes strike in perfect rhythm, fading into silence, and for a long moment, it feels as though the world has forgotten to breathe. What makes these tales so powerful is not only the fear they inspire, but the loneliness they capture. A coach without a driver, horses without a stable, a road that stretches into nowhere. It is motion without purpose, a journey without end. Perhaps that's why these legends endure. They remind us of the silence between heartbeats, the thin space where the living and the dead share the same road for a passing moment. Even now, in certain parts of Ireland, people say that if you hear the sound of invisible wheels on a quiet night, you must fall to your knees and pray. To look upon the death coach is to invite its gaze, and once it has seen you, it will come again. Always at the same hour, always down the same road, always closer than before. They say there are places where the ground itself remembers the weight of those wheels, where the air turns still and even birds refuse to sing. Travelers crossing these stretches often speak of feeling watched or of seeing dim lanterns glowing at the far edge of the fog. But when they move toward it, the light fades away, and all that remains is the whisper of reins pulled tight, the soft jingle of harness chains, and the low breath of something passing unseen through the dark. Some who have heard the phantom coach swear that it feels almost human, as though it knows when it is being followed. A farmer in County Clare once told his grandson that he had seen it while returning from market one winter night. The sky was heavy with snow, and his lantern barely held a glow against the wind. He heard the creak of wheels behind him and thought a neighbor's cart had caught up. But when he turned, he saw the outline of a coach drawn by two tall horses. Their hooves made no sound on the frozen ground. The farmer stood frozen, watching as the carriage rolled past him, so close he could have touched it. Inside, through a frost-covered window, he saw pale faces staring forward, their eyes unmoving, their skin as gray as candle wax. The coach did not stop, nor did it leave any tracks behind. When he reached home, he was pale and trembling. He told his wife what he had seen, and she made him swear never to speak of it again. But that night, she woke to the sound of the same wheels outside their cottage. She opened the door and saw only the snow, smooth and untouched. In the morning, their neighbor from the next village was found dead, lying on the road the coach had traveled. Stories like that one are stitched into the folklore of so many lands. In the Scottish Highlands, shepherds once spoke of the coach death that roamed between villages after storms. It was said to collect those who had escaped drowning or fever, finishing what fate had left undone. In the north of England, there were whispers of a similar phantom known as the Devil's Hearse. Its driver was not headless, but wore a mask of blackened bone, and its wheels were rimmed with fire that burned without heat. Even the faintest retelling of these tales carries the same chill, the idea that some vehicles still travel long after their purpose is ended. In life, they might have carried mourners to burial grounds, kings to their coronations, or newlyweds to their homes. Yet in death, they retrace their routes again and again, following paths no longer marked on any map. One historian once described a parish record from the 1700s in which the vicar wrote of a carriage that passes through the graveyard, seen by none but the dying. It appeared whenever a villager fell gravely ill. The sound of its arrival would drift through the churchyard, though the gate remained locked. A faint glow would move between the tombstones, pausing at one grave before vanishing into the dark. The next morning, the sick would be gone, their faces peaceful, as though they had been gently carried away. In some stories, the phantom coach is drawn not by horses, but by skeletal creatures that wear the shapes of their former bodies, their eyes hollow yet burning with dull light. The roads they travel are said to shimmer faintly when moonlight strikes them, as though the boundary between this world and the next has worn thin. Travelers who stray onto these paths describe sudden gusts of cold air, lanterns that flicker and die, and the strange sense that they are not alone, even in absolute silence. But perhaps the eeriest part of all is the sound. Those who have heard it say that it begins like a heartbeat, steady and far away. Then, as it draws near, the rhythm grows impossibly clear hooves, striking cobblestones that no longer exist, chains clinking in the stillness, the hollow creak of wood that should have rotted centuries ago. People claim that when it passes, all other sounds fade, even the wind. The world pauses as though waiting for the unseen travelers to move on. There are villages where generations still refuse to travel after dark, not out of superstition, but because of what their elders saw. They leave candles burning in windows to ward off the phantom, believing that light reminds the dead they no longer belong here. And yet, sometimes light is what calls them. And many stories tell of travelers seeing two blue flames far ahead on the road, thinking them to be lamps or torches, only to realize too late that they were the spectral eyes of ghostly horses pulling a carriage through the mist. No one can agree on what the carriages carry. Some say souls, others believe they bear memories, the lingering energy of grief and farewell. Whatever the burden, they never seem to stop. They move through storm and silence, through centuries of change, as if bound to an eternal duty. And those who witness them often speak of feeling a strange calm afterward, a stillness that lingers for days, as though something sacred had brushed past them. There are even those who claim to have ridden within one. These rare accounts tell of a sudden drowsiness on a cold night, of hearing voices calling softly from the dark. The traveler feels compelled to step forward to accept an invisible invitation. A carriage door opens without a hand to guide it. Inside, the air is warm and heavy, filled with the faint scent of old flowers. Faces look toward them in silence. They sit down, unsure if they are dreaming, and the world outside fades away. When they awaken, the road is empty, the night quiet, and hours have passed. No one ever sees the coach again. A haunting pattern runs through these stories. The phantom carriage always follows a path connected to grief. Old funeral routes, forgotten by maps but not by memory. Roads that once carried coffins to distant graveyards, or passes where accidents claimed entire families. It's as if the echo of mourning never truly fades, repeating itself like a melody the earth cannot stop humming. Some folklorists believe the wheels of these spectral coaches are carved into time itself, returning to replay the sorrow of their first journey. There's an account from the late 1800s in Yorkshire, where villagers spoke of a phantom coach that appeared every year on the same night in November. It was said to thunder through the valley, its driver cloaked in black, a coffin lashed to the roof. One witness, a local innkeeper, claimed to have seen it stop outside his door during a snowstorm. The horses were gaunt and steaming, their breath hanging like fog. He said the door of the coach swung open, revealing no passengers, only the dark interior that seemed to swallow the lamplight. He slammed the shutters and hid until morning. When he stepped outside, there were hoof prints scorched into the frozen mud, glowing faintly as if touched by heat. Even stranger are the tales that link these phantom coaches to moments of catastrophe. Before certain mine explosions, shipwrecks, or great fires, witnesses claim to hear the sound of hooves racing through the night, wheels striking sparks though no road lay before them. In Cornwall, miners once swore that the dead coach would rush along the cliffs before every collapse, its driver laughing in the wind. The men would cross themselves and whisper prayers, knowing that by dawn, some of them would never return from the depths below. But the legends are not always born from tragedy. Some speak of redemption of spirits bound to finish one last journey before finding rest. In the Welsh borderlands, a story tells of a coachman who served a cruel lord. The lord had ordered him to drive through a storm, refusing to slow even as the bridge ahead gave way. Both man and master perished, swallowed by the river. Since then, travelers crossing that valley claim to see the coach rising from the mist on stormy nights. The driver, they say, no longer carries his lord but an empty seat. Each time he appears, he drives slower, gentler, as though trying to complete the journey the right way. When at last he succeeds, it's said the road will go quiet forever. There's also the curious phenomenon of time-slip stories in which witnesses claim the coach seems not ghostly but real, as though they've stepped backward into another century. In rural France, a group of travelers in the 1920s reported seeing a golden carriage drawn by white horses, its passengers dressed in powdered wigs and lace. They waved as it passed, but when the travelers turned to follow, there was only open road. Local historians later confirmed that such a carriage had once belonged to a noble family who died in the Revolution. Some believe these are echoes of history looping for a moment, time folding in on itself where the veil grows thin. Folklorists sometimes describe these experiences as residual hauntings, not intelligent spirits, but moments burned into the atmosphere, repeating without awareness. Yet there's something unsettling about the consistency of these stories, told across continents and generations. The same sounds, the same midnight hour, the same cold stillness that follows. If they are echoes, why do they still react to the living? Why do some turn their wheels toward those who watch? In more recent times, people claim to have seen the spectral coaches on roads now paved with asphalt and lined with streetlights. A driver outside Dublin once reported what he thought was an old black carriage crossing the highway ahead of him. He braked hard, certain he was about to collide, but the coach passed through his car as if it were mist. The temperature inside his vehicle dropped instantly, and for several seconds his breath fogged the glass. Later he checked the dash cam. The video showed only a flicker of motion and a faint sound like iron on stone. Others have heard them rather than seen them. One story tells of a woman driving home late at night, listening to the rain on her windshield. Suddenly, above the hum of the storm, came the rhythmic beat of hooves keeping pace beside her. She slowed down, but the sound matched her speed perfectly, moving unseen in the darkness beyond the guardrail. When she finally reached the next village, the noise stopped as abruptly as it began. Locals told her that road once followed the route of an old funeral procession, long since replaced by the highway. There are even accounts where entire groups have witnessed it at once, travelers, campers, or police officers, responding to calls of strange lights on the moor. One patrol report from the early 1970s describes officers finding fresh wheel tracks in the soft mud of a lane closed for over 50 years. The prints ended suddenly at a stone wall, with no break or turn, as if the coach had driven straight through it. To some, these stories are simply fragments of folklore clinging to modern life. To others, they're proof that history itself never truly disappears, that grief and duty can echo forever. Whether real or imagined, the phantom carriages remain symbols of movement, without destination, boundless as time. They remind us that the past still travels beside us, rolling quietly down unseen roads, waiting for those who listen to this night closely enough to hear the faint rattle of wheels just beyond the edge of the world. Some say the death coach is not just a symbol of fate, but a force that chooses its witnesses with purpose. In many old accounts, it appears to those who have evaded death people, who survived illness, disaster, or violence that should have claimed them. To see the coach is to be reminded that death does not forget, only waits. A tale from County Kerry tells of a fisherman who narrowly escaped drowning when his boat capsized near the rocks. Grateful but shaken, he returned home to his family. That night, as the tide fell silent, he heard wheels grinding across the shore. When he looked out, a black carriage rolled upon the sand, its wheels sinking into nothing. It stopped at the water's edge, and the driver, a faceless figure in a tattered coat, raised his whip toward him. The fisherman died within the month, his body found in the same spot. In these stories, the coach becomes more than a haunting. It is a ritual, a process the living cannot understand. The sound of the wheels is said to be the counting of moments left and the horse's breath, the cold air that follows a departing soul. Priests once warned their congregations that when they heard the coach passing by, they must not look, for to see it was to be seen return. Some even covered their windows with black cloth during funerals, fearing the phantom would come to claim another. But there are gentler stories, too. In some Irish parishes, the Cóiste of Bodhar is seen as a guide rather than a thief. When a loved one dies far from home, families would light candles in their windows to guide the coach across the countryside, believing it would carry the soul back for burial. The flickering lights across the hills were said to resemble a constellation moving slowly over the earth. When the candles went out, the spirit had reached home and the coach was gone. It's a beautiful thought that perhaps not every haunting is born from malice, but from love refusing to fade. As the legends spread across borders, they adapted to each landscape. In Scandinavia, there are tales of the night wagon, a ghostly sled drawn by pale elk that glides over snow-covered fields. In Eastern Europe, travelers spoke of black wagons filled with flickering candles, guided by monks with hollow eyes who whispered prayers for the dead. In some remote villages of Romania, the carriage is said to rise from the forest itself, built from roots and branches that twist into shape when the moon is high. Its horses drip with dew, their eyes like mirrors reflecting the stars. Whether it arrives to bless or to claim, no one can say, for those who follow it into the woods never return. Even in modern cities, people report glimpses of these phantom travelers. A taxi driver in Prague once described seeing a horse-drawn carriage cross an intersection ahead of him in the middle of the night. The horse's hooves made no sound, yet sparks flared where they struck the cobblestones. He saw a woman inside, dressed in mourning black, her face pale as marble. When he blinked, both carriage and woman were gone, leaving only the smell of wet earth lingering in the air. These moments remind us that the world's old magic still lingers beneath the surface. That time may not be as linear as we think. A road, once traveled often enough by grief or devotion, becomes a bridge, a thin place where memory and spirit overlap. When we walk these paths, we may not see what walks beside us, but the air knows, the stones remember. And sometimes, just sometimes, the veil lifts long enough for the past to ride through again. To imagine the phantom coach is to imagine eternity in motion. No beginning, no destination, only the endless road. The creak of unseen wheels becomes the pulse of the earth itself, echoing from one age to another. Maybe these coaches are the dreams of the dead, still replaying the last journey that defined them. Maybe they are reminders, urging the living not to forget the roads that led them here. There is an odd comfort in the thought that somewhere beyond our sight, the coach still rolls through misty valleys and forgotten bridges, its lanterns glowing faintly against the dark. Perhaps it does not come to take us, but to remind us that all things move from life into memory, from memory into story. And in telling these stories, we keep the wheels turning, giving shape to what the silence leaves behind. When night deepens and the world grows quiet, listen closely to the wind that drifts along old roads. Sometimes it carries a rhythm too steady to be chance, a soft, deliberate cadence. the sound of hooves pacing in the fog. If you ever hear it, do not run and do not call out. Simply stand still and let it pass, for you might just be standing where time bends and the past remembers your name. The phantom coach fades, but the echo of its journey remains a whisper that lingers long after the wheels have gone. It is the sound of centuries passing by, of love, grief, and death woven together into one endless road. The midnight coach continues on, unseen yet eternal, carrying with it the ghosts of every story ever told, and those still waiting to be remembered. There are stories that speak not of carriages, but of solitary riders who traverse the night on horses black as pitch, their faces hidden, their heads missing. These are the headless riders, spirits bound to the roads they once traveled in life, cursed to wander endlessly through darkness. Across Europe, their legends carry similar warnings. Encounter one, and your fate may be sealed, for they are often heralds of death, omens of misfortune, or guardians of secrets too terrible for the living to know. In Ireland, the most feared of these spirits is the Dullahan, a terrifying figure who rides without warning along country lanes and fields. The Dullahan carries its own head tucked under one arm, its eyes blazing like fiery lanterns, scanning the landscape for those whose time has come. Its horse gallops with the fury of storms, and the clatter of its hooves echoes far and wide. To meet the Dullahan is to meet inevitability, for it is said to call out the name of the person whose life is ending. There is no escape from its gaze, no plea that can turn its will. It does not speak in words, only in the silent knowledge that death is drawing near. The headless rider has many forms. In Germany, the Hessische Kopflose Reiter is a specter that haunts the forests, its body shrouded in mist, brandishing a sword as if still fighting battles long past. Soldiers and hunters alike have sworn they glimpsed it at twilight, its body emerging through the fog like smoke, only to vanish when approached. In the United States, the legend crossed the Atlantic in Tales of the Headless Horseman, made famous by Washington Irving in Sleepy Hollow. He rides each Halloween night along the same roads, seeking vengeance for a life taken too soon, a reminder that sins of the past often travel faster than time itself. Historians and folklorists trace these legends back to times of war, plague, and upheaval. Soldiers beheaded on battlefields were said to roam the lands, unable to rest, their torsos bound to the earth by the violent circumstances of their deaths. These stories were passed down by villagers who feared the sound of hooves in the dead of night, who left offerings at crossroads to appease spirits of those who could not find peace. Often these headless riders appear where tragedy has left its mark, old execution sites, ancient bridges, or stretches of road where travelers vanished without a trace. One of the most chilling aspects of the headless rider is the way it interacts with the living. Witnesses speak of seeing a rider approach silently through the fog, the horse moving soundlessly, its eyes glowing in the dark. The rider's head may be tucked under one arm or held high in a ritual of power, and the aura of cold radiates outward, freezing breath in the chests of anyone nearby. Some claim that if you attempt to flee, the horse will match your speed effortlessly, following you until the rider decides your fate. In many accounts, people wake hours or days later with bruises or scratches they cannot explain, evidence of a close encounter with a force beyond reason. In Wales, the legend of the Myrdin Gor speaks of a similar figure, often riding alone through moorland and forest. Locals tell of travelers who encountered him and were compelled to follow for a short distance, only to find themselves back at the same crossroads where they first saw him. Some emerge unharmed, shaken but alive, while others disappear entirely, as though absorbed into the mist that surrounds the rider. The headless horseman becomes not only a symbol of death, but also of inevitability, a reminder that some paths cannot be avoided. There are stories that mix tragedy with morality. In Scotland, one tale tells of a young nobleman who rode recklessly through the hills, heedless of warnings about his behavior. One night, a headless rider appeared before him. The nobleman attempted to pass, laughing at what he believed was a trick of the fog. By morning, his horse was found grazing peacefully near the village, but the man was gone. Villagers believe he was punished for arrogance and disrespect, taken by a spirit who ensures that recklessness on the road is met with consequence. These riders are not limited to rural landscapes. Even in urban settings, there are whispers of spectral figures galloping through cobbled streets, disappearing into alleyways where no living horse could follow. Witnesses report a sense of presence, the feeling of being watched by eyes that see beyond the veil of mortality. The headless rider embodies both fear and fascination, a spectral figure that straddles the line between the known and the unknowable, reminding the living of the thinness of the barrier that separates them from death. Some travelers claim that these spirits are tied to particular objects or landmarks. Ancient bridges, stone circles, and old burial grounds seem to attract them, serving as anchors for their restless journeys. Folklore suggests that headless riders patrol these locations not only as omens, but as guardians, ensuring that the sins and secrets tied to the land remain unbroken. To stumble upon one is to enter a liminal space, a threshold where time bends and the living and the dead share a single road for a fleeting moment. In France, the Cavalier sans tête is said to appear along foggy riversides, often near sites where executions took place. The rider is described as wearing tattered uniforms, carrying weapons, and moving with impossible speed. Fishermen and night travelers have reported seeing it rise from the mist as a dark silhouette, the head tucked under one arm, eyes glowing with spectral fire. When it vanishes, it leaves a silence so profound that the world feels momentarily hollow, as if the noise of life itself has been swallowed. The symbolism of these headless riders is layered. In some interpretations, they are reminders of mortality and the fragility of human existence. In others, they are warnings against pride, cruelty, or neglect. Perhaps they are echoes of history, memories of violent deaths made permanent by the collective fear and fascination of those who witnessed them. Whatever their origin, the stories persist, passing from generation to generation, retaining the same chill, the same rhythm of hooves in the night. Accounts vary, yet the essence remains. The headless rider represents movement without guidance, a body without a head, life continuing in a form stripped of its natural order. Witnesses often speak of feeling a compulsion, an irresistible urge to look, to acknowledge the presence, even as reason screams to run. The rider embodies inevitability, a force that moves in silence yet resonates through every heartbeat, every shadow, every corner of the night, where fear lingers just beyond the light. The headless rider is a figure that refuses to be contained by legend alone. Across the centuries, countless encounters have been recorded where the rider appears unexpectedly, often in moments of great personal or communal tension. Travelers returning late from markets or festivals have spoken of seeing a solitary horseman emerge from foggy crossroads, its head tucked under its arm, riding with a speed that no living horse could match. Even in moments of panic, many describe being unable to look away, as if some invisible force compels the witness to witness the impossible. One particularly chilling account comes from a small village in the Scottish borders, where a group of shepherds watched a rider approach through the moorland mist. The horse was massive, black as midnight, with muscles rippling under the spectral light. The rider had no head, yet somehow the figures on the moor could feel its gaze. One shepherd, unable to resist, raised his hand in warning, and the rider responded by leaning slightly forward as if acknowledging him. The horse's hooves struck the ground with a rhythm that echoed through the hills, a sound that stayed with the men long after the rider vanished. Some of them never spoke of what they had seen, believing that to share the story would summon the rider once more. In Ireland, the Dullahan's appearances are often tied to fate and prophecy. Unlike other spirits, it is not malevolent in the conventional sense. Its purpose is singular and absolute, to collect the souls of those whose time has come. But stories tell of encounters where humans have tried to defy its will, only to find that escape is impossible. One account tells of a farmer who heard the Dullahan calling his name as he walked home through a fog-laden valley. He ran, sprinting over fields and through brambles, yet the sound of hooves matched his every step. At dawn, he was found unconscious near the edge of a cliff, and though he survived, he never again ventured out at night. The lesson, according to the villagers, was that the headless rider cannot be avoided. It will always find the path to its chosen. In Germany, stories of the Kopflose Reiter describe a rider who roams forests and country roads, wielding a sword or whip. It is often linked to acts of violence in life: a soldier executed for treason, a nobleman who betrayed his kin, or a criminal who died by the gallows. The rider is said to be bound to the road where its life ended, doomed to traverse the same path for eternity. Witnesses report that it appears at the exact hour of its death, emerging from shadows or mist, and vanishing only when its task is complete. In some cases, the rider is seen carrying something besides its head: a lantern, a scroll, or an item tied to unfinished business. These objects seem to anchor the spirit, giving it reason to persist in the mortal world. The psychological impact of these encounters is profound. Witnesses often report feeling an overwhelming sense of inevitability, a heavy pressure on the chest, and the awareness of being watched by a consciousness beyond understanding. Sleep disturbances, nightmares, and a persistent sense of dread often follow these experiences. In communities where sightings are common, rituals and precautions emerge: offerings at crossroads, prayers whispered under breath, even the avoidance of certain roads after dusk. These practices speak to a deep human understanding. Some forces, whether spectral or symbolic, demand recognition and respect. In some legends, the headless rider is not merely an omen, but a harbinger of broader catastrophe. Villagers in Wales spoke of a black horseman riding before storms, plagues, or battles. Its appearance was both warning and punishment, a manifestation of collective guilt or unresolved trauma. Some historians believe that these stories evolved as a form of moral guidance, cautioning communities to heed the dangers of pride, cruelty, and neglect. Whether interpreted as supernatural or allegorical, the presence of the headless rider instills the same sense of awe and fear that persists across centuries. One striking feature of these stories is the rider's ability to move between worlds, sometimes appearing in places long abandoned or altered by time. A traveler in northern France reported seeing a headless rider emerge from the ruins of a medieval castle. The horse's hooves struck the cobblestones as though the stones remembered the lives once lived there. The rider held its head aloft, eyes burning with a light that seemed to pierce through the veil of centuries. The witness ran, and by the time they returned with others, the figure had vanished entirely, leaving behind only the faint scent of burning earth and a deep, resonant silence. Headless riders, then, are more than mere ghost stories. They are manifestations of memory, of violence, and of destiny, etched into the roads and forests of history. They appear in the spaces between life and death, reality and legend, serving as reminders that some journeys are eternal, some debts cannot be repaid, and some forces cannot be denied. Encountering one is not merely witnessing a haunting, but stepping momentarily into a world where time, mortality, and fear intersect in a form that is as beautiful as it is terrifying. These headless riders are often bound to the memory of their own violent deaths. In many accounts, they are warriors or nobles whose lives ended abruptly, leaving their spirits tethered to the sites of betrayal, battle, or execution. One story from the forests of Bavaria tells of a knight who was decapitated in a duel over honor. Every year, on the anniversary of his death, villagers would claim to see a headless figure riding through the dense mist of the woods. His horse's hooves were said to strike sparks from the stone paths, and the clinking of metal from his armor echoed like distant thunder. Witnesses reported a sense of foreboding, a shiver that ran deeper than the chill of the air, as though the spirit was aware of them, acknowledging their presence with an invisible gaze. In England, the tale of the Black Knight of Penrith has endured for centuries. The knight, decapitated during a skirmish, is said to roam the moors on stormy nights, his black horse emerging suddenly from the fog. Travelers who attempt to pass report an oppressive silence that envelops the land, broken only by the rhythmic pounding of hooves. Some have claimed the rider stops beside them, headless form turning slowly, the air around it crackling with cold. Others have tried to flee, only to find themselves disoriented, looping back to the same moor where the knight first appeared. The stories serve as both caution and curiosity, warning the living of forces beyond comprehension while enticing them with a glimpse of the impossible. The headless rider also carries symbolic weight. Scholars argue that it represents the consequences of actions taken without thought, the relentless pursuit of guilt or vengeance that cannot rest in death. In folklore, the rider often seeks justice, vengeance, or restitution, forcing those who encounter it to confront their own mortality or moral failings. There are tales in Ireland where the Dullahan is not only a collector of souls, but a guide, leading the dying along a path to peace, provided the living show respect and humility. These narratives blur the line between horror and moral instruction, creating stories that terrify while embedding deeper cultural values. Even in more modern interpretations, the essence of the headless rider remains. A truck driver traveling late through the Scottish Highlands in the 1970s reported seeing a black horse galloping across the road in front of him. The figure had no head, yet the driver felt its presence, a weight pressing on his chest and mind. The horse vanished as suddenly as it appeared, leaving only the echo of hooves in the mist and the lingering fear of what had almost been touched. Such accounts suggest that these spirits, whether purely folkloric or real in some unknown way, persist in the collective memory, adapting to changing landscapes while retaining the same haunting essence. The connection between headless riders and specific roads is also notable. Folklorists point out that many sightings occur along old trade routes, battlefields, or paths between towns and villages where executions or accidents took place. Crossroads, in particular, are significant. They are liminal spaces where the boundaries between life and death, past and present, blur. Witnesses often report seeing the rider approach from one path, pass them, and vanish down another, as if the very geography itself guides the spirit. This recurring motif reinforces the idea that headless riders are not random apparitions, but entities bound to specific histories and locations. In some tales, the rider is not alone. Accounts speak of ghostly companions or spectral entourages, black dogs that run alongside, faint figures of soldiers following in silent formation, or ghostly lights hovering near the rider. These details deepen the sense of the supernatural, suggesting that the headless figure is part of a larger, unseen world that continues alongside our own. The landscape, too, becomes character. Fog-laden forests, wind-swept moors, and abandoned lanes where even the moonlight feels hesitant to shine. These settings amplify the haunting nature of the rider, embedding the story into both the physical and psychological terrain. The headless rider has also been linked to warnings of imminent disaster. Across Europe, communities have claimed that seeing the rider precedes illness, storms, or accidents. In some English villages, it was said that the rider would appear to anyone who was about to die within the year. Families would take these appearances seriously, often leaving offerings or performing rituals to appease the spirit. In Ireland, a specific Dullahan was thought to visit households where someone had cheated death, reminding them that fate is inexorable and inescapable. These legends are sustained by their sheer consistency across time and culture. From the forests of Germany to the moors of England, from the villages of Ireland to the folk tales of America, the headless rider appears in remarkably similar forms. Its presence continues to instill awe, fear, and fascination. The tales endure because they touch something primal, the fear of death, the allure of vengeance, and the mystery of forces beyond human understanding. The headless rider is more than a specter of death. It is a living memory of violence, injustice, and unfinished journeys. Some stories describe the rider as seeking restitution, bound to the roads where wrongs occurred in life. In France, a notorious tale speaks of a decapitated officer during the Napoleonic Wars. Soldiers claim to see his black horse galloping through fog-laden battlefields, sword in hand, eyes glowing from the vacant socket of his missing head. It was said that the officer hunted down anyone who bore the guilt of betrayal, moving silently across the hills with relentless precision. Those who encountered him described feeling the weight of centuries pressing down, as though the rider carried not only his own curse, but the collective memory of the battlefield. In some rural areas, the headless rider has become a figure of cautionary folklore, warning travelers to respect the roads and the history embedded within them. One story from Scotland tells of a shepherd boy who wandered too far from his village at dusk. He spotted a dark horse emerging from the mist, riderless at first glance. Suddenly, a headless figure leapt onto the horse's back, eyes glowing and whip raised. The boy froze, unable to look away, and the rider silently beckoned him to follow. The boy's memory of that night remained vivid into adulthood, though he never ventured near the moor again. Villagers said he had been spared, but only because he acknowledged the presence of the rider with reverence and humility. The phenomenon is not limited to European lore. In America, settlers brought stories of headless riders who haunted highways and rural roads, blending with native legends of spirits guarding sacred spaces. Tales of phantom horsemen appearing before tragedies, particularly during the Revolutionary War, were common. Travelers reported sudden chills, the sound of hooves that could not exist, and the eerie sight of a rider whose form was nearly human, but unnervingly incomplete. These accounts reveal a pattern. The headless rider appears at moments of vulnerability, a liminal presence that blurs the boundary between fear and fate. There are also instances of the rider acting almost as a guide rather than a predator. Folklore suggests that some headless figures lead the lost safely through treacherous terrain, warning them of dangers ahead. In Wales, one tale tells of a man east of the mountains who saw a headless rider approach. Instead of striking terror, the rider turned and gestured toward a hidden path through the mist. The man followed and eventually found his way back to the village, convinced that he had been aided by a spirit bound to the earth, ensuring that certain travelers survived to fulfill their purpose. These dualities, harbinger and guide, vengeance and aid, add layers of mystery to the rider's presence. The roads themselves seem to remember these encounters. Old maps show routes long abandoned but still traveled in stories. Crossroads, stone bridges, and ruined cottages become focal points where the rider appears with the most intensity. Witnesses often describe a sudden hush in the natural world, as if all life holds its breath while the headless rider passes. Trees cease to rustle, animals vanish into the underbrush, and even the wind dies down. The atmosphere is charged with a presence that transcends time, leaving a lasting imprint on anyone who experiences it. Psychologically, these stories tap into something universal: the fear of being pursued, the inevitability of death, and the consequences of unresolved actions. But the rider is also a reminder of continuity. It shows us that some paths, some choices, and some mistakes echo far beyond their original moment. Roads become metaphors for journeys, and the rider becomes a guardian of memory, ensuring that certain lessons, warnings, or consequences are never forgotten. In some accounts, the rider's appearance is tied to ritual. Families would leave offerings at crossroads or burn candles at the edge of moors, hoping to appease spirits and avert misfortune. Folklorists note that these practices may have emerged not only from fear, but from a sense of respect for the unknown. The headless rider is not merely a ghost. It is a manifestation of the boundary between the living and the dead, a figure that demands acknowledgement and mindfulness. Even today, the legend persists. Drivers in remote countryside regions report fleeting glimpses of a headless figure riding silently through fog or across fields. The horse's hooves strike with impossible rhythm, and the rider's torso twists unnaturally, as though animated by some unseen force. Many awaken from such encounters shaken, their memories vivid and tangible, a reminder that some spirits remain tied to our world, visible only to those attuned to the faint pulse of the night. Ultimately, the headless rider is both terror and lesson. It embodies inevitability, the weight of the past, and the haunting of unresolved acts. It reminds us that some forces cannot be outrun, some roads cannot be avoided, and some encounters leave a mark that lingers far longer than the briefest glimpse in the dark. The rider moves silently yet relentlessly through centuries, landscapes, and human imagination, a specter of fate that continues to haunt the paths of the living, ensuring that the stories of the cursed, the fallen, and the forgotten remain alive in the whisper of the wind and the echo of unseen hooves. There are roads that travelers avoid, not because of storms or bandits, but because of the stories that cling to them like mist. These are the paths of the cursed journey, roads haunted by passengers who step aboard a carriage or mount a horse only to vanish before reaching their destination. In the quiet hours of night, whispers speak of travelers who never return, of journeys that begin in hope and end in eternal wandering. Across the villages of Europe, these stories take many forms. In Ireland, families tell of travelers who accepted rides from strangers along deserted country lanes. The passenger would climb aboard a seemingly ordinary carriage, expecting to reach the next village by dawn. But hours would pass, or sometimes mere moments, and they would find themselves deep in unfamiliar woods, roads twisted into impossible shapes, or the vehicle itself fading into mist. Some were found days later, disoriented and terrified, unable to recount the route they had traveled, while others were never seen again. It is said that the cursed journey often begins innocently. A weary merchant on a stormy night, a young couple walking home after a festival, or a lone scholar returning from study might hear the creak of wheels, see the lantern light flicker, and accept the offer of a ride. The driver is rarely seen clearly, cloaked in shadow, their voice smooth and polite, carrying an undercurrent of something unnatural. Passengers speak of feeling a subtle weight in the air, a sense that time itself is bending, yet polite gestures and warm light lull them into a false comfort. One story from northern England tells of a young woman traveling to visit her family during winter. Snow had fallen thickly on the roads, and she struggled through drifts until a black carriage emerged from the haze. The driver, a tall man with pale skin and dark clothing, offered her shelter from the storm. Grateful, she climbed aboard. The carriage moved swiftly, yet she noticed the countryside around her seemed unfamiliar. Trees twisted in impossible angles, shadows that seemed alive stretching across the road. When she tried to speak, the driver's head slowly turned toward her, revealing nothing where his face should have been. The young woman screamed, but the world outside had already shifted. By morning, the carriage had disappeared, leaving only a set of frozen tracks in the snow leading nowhere. She returned home shaken, and from that day forward swore she had glimpsed the land of the lost, a place where time loops endlessly, and travelers become part of the night. In France, there are tales of the carrosse maudit, a cursed carriage said to appear at crossroads after dusk. Passengers step in seeking warmth, shelter, or guidance, but the journey is never completed. The carriage twists through forests, over hills, and along rivers that do not exist on any map. Those who step inside describe a strange sensation. The horse's hooves strike with a rhythm that feels both steady and unnaturally slow. The lanterns swing without wind, and shadows shift in ways that seem to defy geometry. Hours may pass, yet the passenger notices no progress. Panic often sets in, and in those moments, the carriage seems to sense fear, feeding on it, guiding the traveler further into the unknown. The cursed journey is not always literal. In some legends, travelers vanish only to be found years later, unchanged in appearance, in places they never intended to reach. Villagers in Wales speak of a man who accepted a ride from a phantom coach while traveling to a distant fair. He disappeared for decades, only to return to his village on the exact date he had left, unaware of the time that had passed. Some believe that the carriage does not simply move through space, but through layers of time, carrying its passengers across invisible currents where past, present, and future intersect. The psychological aspect of these tales is profound. People recount a feeling of timelessness aboard the cursed carriage, a strange sense of déjà vu, and the overwhelming awareness that they are no longer in control. Every detail is familiar, yet impossibly wrong. The road curves where it should be straight. The trees lean at impossible angles, and distant sounds echo too clearly or not at all. Travelers often report moments when they swear the carriage has returned to the exact place it started, yet everything around them has shifted, as if the world itself is being rewritten around them. Sometimes the cursed journey has witnesses who never actually board the carriage. In certain accounts from rural Germany, people speak of seeing travelers step toward a coach only to vanish before touching the door. Others describe seeing figures seated inside, pale and unmoving, their eyes hollow, staring into eternity. Families would later recognize those vanished figures in portraits or mementos, long after the travelers had disappeared, suggesting that the curse extends beyond the physical realm into memory and legend. Passengers who never arrive are said to inhabit a liminal space caught between worlds. Folklore hints at a connection to unresolved grief, sins, or promises unkept in life. One story tells of a young man traveling to reunite with his fiancée, only to be taken by a phantom carriage. He remains trapped on the roads, eternally seeking her while she waits in vain. Witnesses sometimes report glimpsing him in the corner of a foggy lane, or hearing his voice carried by the wind, calling for a love that cannot be reached. Many cultures have similar tales. In Scotland, there are reports of night coaches that appear to carry entire families, traveling endlessly through fog and rain. Each member aboard fades one by one until only the driver remains, a solitary figure cloaked in shadow. In Italy, legends speak of the Carro degli Smarriti, the cart of the lost, which transports wandering souls through twisted country lanes. Its passengers are unaware of the passing years, of the lives left behind, as if the carriage exists outside the normal flow of human time. What unites these stories is the same chilling detail. The journey is always incomplete, the destination always unreachable. The carriage, the horses, and the driver all exist in a space outside mortal comprehension. It is a realm of endless twilight, a road that folds back upon itself, carrying passengers in loops from which there is no escape. And in that realm, the faintest sign of panic or impatience can tighten the curse, ensuring that the journey is repeated for eternity. Some tales suggest that the cursed journey is not simply a supernatural trick, but a lesson woven into the very fabric of the roads. In parts of France, travelers speak of the carrosse fantôme, a phantom coach that appears at the edge of forests and moors after nightfall. Those who climb aboard are often fleeing danger or seeking warmth, but the carriage seems to have a will of its own. It follows paths that do not exist, veers into places forgotten by maps, and moves with a rhythm that lulls the passenger into false security. Many who experience this report a profound sense of inevitability, as though the carriage itself knows their fears and desires, shaping the journey to reflect them. One account from Ireland describes a group of merchants traveling along a snowy road. They saw a coach approaching, lanterns glowing like distant stars. They climbed aboard eagerly, but as soon as they were seated, the horse's pace quickened unnaturally. The scenery shifted around them, trees bending at impossible angles, shadows deepening and stretching unnervingly. Hours passed, yet the road seemed unchanged. One merchant tried to jump down, but the door slammed shut on its own. By dawn, the coach had vanished, leaving the travelers at the same spot where they had first seen it, though they felt as if days had passed. They returned home forever changed, speaking rarely of the experience, fearful that naming it aloud might call it back. The cursed journey is often tied to places steeped in history and sorrow. Ancient battlefields, sites of mass executions, and long-abandoned inns are all known to attract these phantom coaches. In Germany, the Wagen der Verlorenen is said to appear along roads where travelers have historically gone missing. Locals claim that those who accept a ride are transported through both space and time, traversing paths that intersect with the deaths, tragedies, and unfinished business of the past. In some accounts, passengers encounter people from centuries ago, sitting quietly in the seats across from them, unaware of the world outside the carriage. Time itself seems to bend aboard the cursed vehicle. Passengers report clocks spinning wildly, days passing in moments, and the sensation of living through multiple nights simultaneously, and the longer one remains, the more disoriented the mind becomes. Some describe seeing fleeting glimpses of their younger selves or ancestors, ghostly figures bound to the journey as part of an eternal procession. Others speak of landscapes changing in impossible ways, hills folding over themselves, rivers flowing uphill, villages appearing and disappearing at the edge of vision. It is a realm where reality warps, and the passenger's perception is the only anchor to sanity. There are also those who recount encounters with the driver. Often shrouded in darkness, their features are obscured, but eyes gleam with an unnatural light. Some passengers claim the driver speaks in riddles or whispers warnings that seem meaningful only in retrospect. Others describe gestures, subtle hints, or small acts of kindness, suggesting the driver is not merely a captor, but a guide. Yet the journey remains cursed. No matter the driver's intentions, the passenger rarely reaches their intended destination. In Scotland, folklore tells of a young bride traveling to her wedding. She was intercepted by a black carriage appearing from the fog. The coachman, faceless beneath a hood, offered her a ride. She accepted, lulled by the warmth of the carriage, but soon realized the countryside around her was unfamiliar, twisted into patterns she had never seen. The horse's hooves struck the ground in perfect cadence, and the lanterns inside the carriage illuminated her surroundings with a pale, unearthly glow. Hours passed, though she could not tell how many, until she found herself back at the same spot where she had first seen the carriage. The wedding never happened, and she would speak of the carriage for the rest of her life, haunted by the journey that never ended. The cursed journey often reflects personal fears and unresolved desires. Some passengers report visions of lost loved ones, opportunities never taken, or secrets left unspoken. The carriage becomes a mirror, showing not just physical roads, but the inner terrain of regret and longing. Those who encounter it sometimes emerge with profound insight, though it comes at the cost of lingering unease and the knowledge that part of their journey remains forever unfinished. Accounts from rural America mirror these European tales. Travelers on lonely back roads in the 19th and early 20th centuries reported being offered rides by ghostly coaches. The horse's hooves struck the dirt silently, the driver remained unseen, and the interior of the carriage seemed to shift, walls stretching or narrowing unnaturally. Passengers who survived these experiences spoke of a feeling of being trapped in a loop, moving continuously yet never arriving. In some cases, the carriage would vanish, leaving them alone in the darkness, the faint echo of wheels in their memory. The cursed journey has a way of leaving its mark on those who survive it. Passengers who return often describe subtle changes, both physical and psychological. Some speak of unexplained bruises or scratches that appeared overnight. Others report lingering fatigue, as if the journey drained more than their energy. Dreams are haunted by flickering lanterns, endless roads, and the creak of carriage wheels that echo even in daylight. Those who have been carried by the cursed coach sometimes develop a sensitivity to the night, hearing distant hooves or glimpsing shadows at crossroads that others cannot perceive. In parts of Ireland, the phenomenon is tied closely to old funeral traditions. People believe that the souls of the dead sometimes hitch a ride on passing coaches, unwilling to move on until certain duties were completed or messages delivered. If a living passenger inadvertently joined the ride, they became entwined with the spirit's journey. Families would warn their members never to accept rides from strangers after dark, especially long roads where coffins had once traveled. The carriage, they said, did not discriminate. It could carry the living as easily as the dead, merging their paths in ways that left both trapped in temporal limbo. Some passengers describe encounters with fellow travelers inside the carriage. These are often ghostly figures, pale and silent, dressed in clothing from centuries past. One account from France tells of a man who stepped aboard a coach near a desolate bridge. Inside, he found a woman in a faded gown, clutching a small bundle to her chest. She did not speak, yet he felt an unspoken plea, a sense of urgency pressing against him. Hours or perhaps minutes later, the coach dropped him at a crossroads where he had first encountered it, but the woman had vanished. Later, he learned that a young mother had died decades before on that very bridge, her child taken from her hands. The cursed journey, it seemed, allowed her grief to linger, creating a liminal space where the living and dead intersected. Time behaves unpredictably on these journeys. Travelers report clocks spinning backward, stars shifting in unnatural patterns and rivers flowing in reverse. Some find that what felt like hours aboard the carriage translates to days or even years in the outside world. In certain cases, passengers arrive at destinations long abandoned, towns that no longer exist, or places whose geography has changed completely. They are forced to reconcile their memories with the world they once knew, aware that the cursed journey exists outside ordinary rules of time and space. The psychological toll can be severe. Survivors describe insomnia, persistent anxiety, and a heightened awareness of shadowed spaces. They hear the faint creak of wheels in quiet streets, catch glimpses of lantern light in fog, and feel compelled to avoid certain roads altogether. Many carry a lifelong fascination with maps, crossroads, and the timing of journeys, as though trying to anticipate where the cursed carriage might appear next. Some develop superstitious behaviors, leaving candles burning overnight, avoiding travel after dusk, or whispering prayers at intersections. Folklorists note that these stories often carry a moral undertone. Travelers who accept the ride without caution are punished by endless wandering. Those who approach with humility, respect, or an understanding of the weight of the past sometimes survive, though altered forever. This duality mirrors broader themes in folklore: the consequences of human choices, the weight of history, and the necessity of acknowledging forces beyond comprehension. The Cursed Journey is not merely a tale of terror, but a reflection of human vulnerability in the face of the unknown. In Italy, the Carro degli Erranti is said to appear on foggy nights along isolated roads in the countryside. Travelers who step aboard find themselves pulled through valleys and hills that seem impossibly steep, forests with trees bending in unnatural directions, and rivers that reflect impossible constellations. Some report conversations with unseen passengers, while others experience sudden silence that feels heavier than air itself. Time dilates, sometimes minutes, feeling like hours, other times hours like minutes. The journey continues until the carriage chooses to release its passenger, often back at the same point of departure, leaving them with a haunting sense of displacement. Even modern roads are not immune. In rural parts of America, witnesses have reported stepping into cars or vans that suddenly become phantom coaches. Vehicles appear ordinary, yet once inside, travelers experience the same disorienting loop of impossible landscapes, distorted time, and ghostly passengers. The curse seems to adapt, taking new forms while retaining its essential nature. A journey that cannot be completed, a path that traps those who follow it, and a lingering memory that refuses to fade. Some encounters are deeply personal. There are accounts of passengers seeing visions of moments they regret, choices they avoided, or words they never spoke. The cursed journey becomes a mirror, reflecting the inner fears and unresolved grief of those aboard. One English traveler described being forced to witness his own past mistakes replayed in eerie detail, alongside ghostly passengers acting out moments he had long buried. The experience left him shaken for years, convinced that the carriage had offered him a rare, terrifying glimpse of the consequences of unexamined life. The cursed journey teaches patience, caution, and respect for the unknown. It reminds us that not all roads are meant to be traveled lightly, that time can twist in ways beyond comprehension, and that some passengers are never meant to arrive at their destination. The stories endure because they resonate with a deep human fear, the loss of control, the blurring of reality and memory, and the possibility that some journeys continue long after we believe them finished. The cursed journey does not end when the carriage or coach disappears from sight. Many who survive the experience describe lingering effects, a subtle yet persistent pull toward the roads where the phantom vehicle appeared. Some return to the same crossroad, drawn by curiosity or a sense of unfinished business, only to find the fog thickening, the night stretching longer, and the sound of distant hooves echoing as if time itself remembered the passage. Others carry the memory like a shadow, glimpsing the faint flicker of lantern light in the corner of their vision, or feeling the soft vibration of wheels in the silence of their homes. In parts of Scotland, legends describe travelers who encountered the cursed carriage more than once, years apart, yet find themselves aged differently from those around them. A merchant might meet the coach one winter night and then, decades later, recognize its lanterns flickering in the distance as if no time had passed. These stories suggest that the journey exists outside ordinary chronology, a space where the past, present, and future intersect in ways that defy human understanding. The passenger is suspended in this liminal realm, caught between what was, what is, and what might be. The nature of the curse is often tied to the intentions of the passenger. Those who embark with humility, respect, or acceptance of their place in the world are sometimes returned, shaken but intact. Those driven by fear, arrogance, or desperation often vanish entirely. Their fates entwine with the coach in ways no living person can trace. Folklore from France, Germany, and Italy all contain this recurring theme. The cursed journey is both literal and moral, a reflection of the traveler's inner self as much as the outer world they navigate. Some narratives involve passengers who discover that the cursed journey connects with historical tragedies. In rural England, a young woman who accepted a ride from a phantom coach found herself passing over fields where plague victims had been buried centuries before. Shadows moved across the road like living specters, lantern light illuminating pale, silent faces. She felt herself being watched, guided, and judged simultaneously. When the coach finally stopped, she emerged at a point that had once been the site of a village long destroyed. She carried with her a memory that was both vivid and impossible, a bridge between her own life and the collective trauma of history. In Ireland, there are accounts of passengers who board the cursed carriage, unknowingly carrying objects tied to grief or regrets, letters, keepsakes, or tokens of love lost. These items seem to anchor the spirit world to the mortal realm, ensuring that the journey continues until the attachments are acknowledged or resolved. Some passengers report conversations with ghostly companions who do not speak aloud, but convey messages through gestures, expressions, or fleeting visions. The experience becomes less a horror and more a profound, disorienting meditation on attachment, memory, and the unseen currents that guide human lives. The cursed journey often intersects with geography in ways that deepen the mystery. Crossroads, ancient bridges, forests, and abandoned inns are frequently cited as points where the phantom vehicle appears. These spaces are liminal by nature, neither fully inhabited nor completely abandoned, places where the boundary between the living and the dead, the known and the unknown, is thinnest. Folklore suggests that the journey persists in these spaces because human consciousness and memory leave traces that can be sensed or manipulated by forces beyond comprehension. The road itself remembers, bending and folding to carry passengers through loops of time and space. There are also tales of collective experiences. Entire groups traveling together have been swept into the cursed journey, their carriage filled with silent figures from the past. Some report feeling the weight of centuries pressing down upon them, hearing the soft whispers of travelers who died long ago. Others speak of glimpsing events that have not yet occurred, as if the coach traverses not just space, but possible futures. In these accounts, the journey becomes a nexus of history, memory, and fate, where individual passengers are both observers and participants in a larger, unending drama. Survivors often describe the journey as a test of perception and patience. Moments that feel eternal may last seconds. Seconds may stretch into hours, and travelers are forced to confront their fears, regrets, and desires in ways they never anticipated. The carriage becomes a mirror, reflecting inner truths that cannot be ignored. Some emerge with newfound understanding or empathy, while others are left haunted, forever aware of roads that exist outside human comprehension. Roads that carry passengers who never arrive, eternally adrift in the mist. Ultimately, the cursed journey embodies the tension between the familiar and the unknowable, between hope and despair, between the life we lead and the mysteries that lie beyond. Its tales endure because they resonate with fundamental human fears: the fear of being lost, the fear of unseen forces, and the fear that some journeys may never truly end. And yet, within these stories, there is a quiet, haunting beauty, the suggestion that even in loss and displacement, there is a continuity, a connection to the past, and a reminder that the roads we travel are never as simple as they seem. There are roads that exist more in memory than in reality, paths that twist and turn in ways that defy maps and logic. Travelers speak of roads that appear suddenly, shrouded in fog, moonlight reflecting off slick cobblestones or dew-laden grass, inviting passage yet warning of danger. These are the haunted roads, places where time is thin, and the boundary between the living and the dead blurs. Along these routes, trails vanish as quickly as they are discovered, leaving only whispers of journeys that might have been. In Ireland, there are lanes known as the seedy paths, ancient roads said to be favored by spirits. Travelers report walking for hours only to find the path disappearing, twisting back upon itself, or leading into dense thickets where no path should exist. The mist is thick and unnatural, swirling as if alive, and the trees lean inward, blocking the view of the world beyond. Some who wander these roads hear the soft clatter of hooves or carriage wheels behind them, though when they turn, there is nothing. The experience is disorienting, a test of perception and courage, and many swear never to traverse the same lane again. Haunted roads are often tied to history, particularly tragedy or violence. Old battlefield routes, where soldiers fell in great numbers, become corridors of spectral echoes. In England, stretches of moorland where raids and skirmishes occurred are reported to be haunted by wandering figures and phantom carriages. Witnesses speak of sudden chills, fog rising inexplicably, and fleeting glimpses of riders or travelers whose forms are blurred, as if caught between worlds. Animals, too, are said to sense these presences. Dogs may refuse to enter certain paths, horses balk unexpectedly, and birds remain eerily silent as travelers pass. In France, the legend of the Route des Disparus, or Road of the Vanished, is particularly chilling. Those who venture onto it at night describe the sensation of being followed, glimpses of shadowy figures at the edges of vision, and the constant feeling of moving through a space that is alive and aware. One account tells of a young man walking home after a market fair. He noticed a narrow lane that seemed familiar yet strangely unfamiliar. As he progressed, the road began to shift beneath his feet, trees arching impossibly, lantern light bending unnaturally, and distant hooves echoing as though racing alongside him. When he reached the end, the road had vanished entirely, leaving him standing at a crossroads he had never seen before. Vanishing trails are not always literal paths. Some are extensions of time, memory, and perception. In Germany, the Weg der Schatten, or Path of Shadows, is a stretch of forested road where travelers report experiencing entire journeys that never happened in the physical world. They feel as if they have walked for miles, passing bridges, inns, and villages. Yet when they return, they realize only minutes have passed. These experiences are vivid and often accompanied by visual and auditory details: the distant ringing of a bell, the soft sway of lanterns, the whisper of a voice calling a name. The mind perceives them as real, leaving a lingering sense that something beyond understanding has unfolded. The haunted nature of these roads is often tied to specific objects or markers. Ancient milestones, stone bridges, ruined walls, or even gnarled trees become focal points where the supernatural manifests. In Wales, one particular trail is marked by a twisted oak at its entrance. Travelers who pass beneath it at twilight report that the road ahead disappears into mist, with figures walking silently at the edges. Some are headless, others cloaked, and all are silent observers, witnesses to the living trespassing in a realm not meant for them. Offerings were sometimes left by villagers: a coin, a candle, or a scrap of cloth to appease the spirits and ensure safe passage. These haunted roads often intersect with local lore about time loops and spatial anomalies. In Scotland, there are reports of trails that bend in impossible ways, doubling back on themselves, creating the sensation that one is walking in circles for hours. Travelers speak of landmarks, shifting subtly, a fence appearing where it was not, a gate swinging open that leads nowhere, or a river crossing that vanishes mid-step. Those who follow these trails too far risk becoming disoriented, losing their sense of direction, and, in some stories, vanishing entirely into the landscape itself. Psychologically, haunted roads exploit the human fear of the unknown and the unseen. The thin veil of night, the limited vision in fog or twilight, and the mind's tendency to fill gaps with expectation and imagination, all combine to heighten the sense of dread. Many who report encounters speak of the road itself, seeming to react to them, narrowing, widening, tilting, or curving to draw them deeper into the unknown. The sensation is often accompanied by subtle auditory cues: a branch snapping, hooves echoing faintly, the creak of a wheel, or whispers too soft to comprehend fully. Haunted roads can also carry historical memory, preserving tragedies long past. Sites of executions, murders, or mass deaths are particularly potent. In England, the route between two small villages is said to be haunted by travelers who vanished centuries ago. Locals report seeing ghostly figures walking along the road, only to disappear when approached. The air grows heavy, a subtle hum fills the space, and the sense of being watched is nearly overwhelming. These stories suggest that the roads themselves act as repositories for sorrow, memory, and unresolved events, replaying them for those who dare traverse them. Some travelers encounter signs that the road is alive in a different sense. In Italy, the Sentiero Perduto, or Lost Trail, is a narrow path through hills and forests where travelers report small, inexplicable movements: a stone rolling, leaves rustling without wind, or distant lanterns moving in patterns that mimic their own steps. Those who pause to observe may see shadowy figures briefly emerge from the fog, vanishing as soon as attention is fully focused. The trail seems to respond to presence, guiding or warning travelers through subtle manipulations, as though it is conscious of who walks upon it. These trails often connect to the larger network of haunted spaces, crossroad encounters, cursed journeys, and headless riders. One story from France tells of a man walking along a vanishing trail who encountered a phantom carriage. As he stepped aside, the trail itself seemed to fold around him, the landscape stretching unnaturally. Figures appeared at the edge of the mist, observing silently. He barely escaped, arriving hours later at a village he did not recognize, convinced that the road itself had tested him, measuring courage, attention, and respect for forces beyond comprehension. Some haunted roads are known to intersect with natural phenomena. in ways that intensify their eerie reputation. Travelers report sudden fog banks forming without warning, cold winds that sweep across open fields even in the warmth of summer, and patches of darkness that swallow the moonlight entirely. In parts of Germany, there are tales of the Schwarze Wege, black roads that appear perfectly ordinary during the day but transform at night. Trees seem to lean closer, their branches intertwining to form shadowy arches. Sounds are distorted. Hooves strike the ground with a hollow resonance. Distant voices echo unnaturally, and footsteps behind the traveler may or may not belong to a companion. Some who walk these paths alone claim to hear whispers in languages they do not understand, words that carry urgent warnings or silent judgment. In Wales, a network of trails known as the Gwylwyr y Nos, or Night Watchers' Paths, is said to be inhabited by spectral figures who observe all who pass. Travelers describe the sensation of being followed, though when they look back, there is no one there. Occasionally, glimpses of cloaked figures, their faces obscured or absent entirely, appear at the edge of vision. Some hikers report fleeting glimpses of lanterns bobbing in the fog, marking the path of the watchers. Yet no matter how fast they move, the lights seem to stay just out of reach. These encounters often leave witnesses disoriented, anxious, and deeply aware of their own vulnerability on the road. Haunted roads also appear to have memory. Certain locations seem to preserve echoes of past events, replaying them for those sensitive enough to perceive them. In Ireland, travelers speak of hearing faint carriage wheels along deserted roads, accompanied by ghostly murmurs, or the clatter of hooves on cobblestones that no longer exist. Others report seeing spectral travelers dressed in centuries-old clothing, walking or riding silently alongside them before fading into mist. These experiences suggest that the road itself acts as a vessel for history, holding on to the energies of past lives, tragedies, and unfinished journeys. The concept of vanishing trails adds another layer of unease. These paths appear suddenly, as if carved from the landscape in response to the traveler's presence, and vanish just as quickly. In northern Italy, the sentieri svaniti, or vanishing paths, are said to emerge at twilight along hillsides and riverbanks. Travelers who step onto them find the surrounding world shifting subtly. The slope of the hill changes, familiar landmarks twist, and bridges appear or disappear with no logical explanation. Some who attempt to leave the trail are guided back by invisible forces, while others vanish entirely, becoming part of the landscape themselves. The phenomenon is not limited to Europe. In the Appalachian Mountains of America, hikers report paths that vanish behind them, leaving dense forest where a trail should be. Ghostly lights appear in the distance, resembling lanterns, and faint sounds a horse's neigh. The rattle of a carriage, the soft murmur of voices accompany them. Some trails are tied to old roads used by settlers or Native American trade routes, carrying the residual memory of centuries of travel, conflict, and tragedy. Those who walk these paths at night often speak of an overwhelming feeling of being observed, a presence that is patient, intelligent, and indifferent to human fear. There are also roads haunted by sudden temporal shifts. Travelers describe moments where the landscape appears frozen, the air heavy and still, punctuated by sudden movements, a branch falling, a shadow passing, or a figure appearing in the distance. In some legends, time flows differently along these roads. Seconds can stretch into hours, hours into years, leaving travelers disoriented and unsure of their place in reality. One account from Scotland tells of a man who walked a misty lane for what felt like hours, only to emerge at the very place he began, the village around him unchanged, the sun in the same position in the sky. The road had carried him through a liminal space, outside the normal rules of time. Haunted roads are rarely solitary in their purpose. They often intersect with other supernatural phenomena. Cursed carriages, headless riders, and vanished travelers. A single path may host multiple legends, each layering upon the other, creating a network of fear, memory, and spectral energy. Travelers who experience these roads report a sense of connection to centuries of human experience, a feeling that the land remembers both tragedy and joy, and that every step taken resonates in ways unseen. The psychological impact of traversing haunted roads is profound. Anxiety, disorientation, and a heightened sensitivity to sounds and shadows are common. Some travelers report recurring dreams or visions tied to the paths, seeing themselves walking along the same twisting trails, always pursued or guided by unseen forces. Others develop an obsession with the geography of the area, mapping and remapping routes, trying to understand patterns that may be beyond human comprehension. The roads demand attention, respect, and sometimes surrender, leaving an indelible mark on those who pass. The most chilling haunted roads are those tied to disappearances. Legends across Europe recount travelers vanishing without a trace, their last known locations often at the edge of a forest or along a fog-laden lane. In Germany, the Weg der Verschwundenen, or Road of the Vanished, is infamous for accounts of entire groups stepping onto the path and never returning. Some are said to have been absorbed into the road itself, becoming part of its memory, their forms glimpsed only in mist, or reflected faintly in puddles long after the travelers should have moved on. These stories suggest a road alive with history, retaining fragments of those who dared to journey upon it. In Italy, the Sentieri Fantasma, or ghostly trails, carry similar accounts. Travelers report stepping onto narrow paths at dusk, only to find that no matter which direction they walk, the trail loops back on itself. Along the way, phantom lanterns swing gently from invisible hooks. Ghostly figures pace silently at the edges of vision, and soft whispers float on the wind, as if echoing conversations from another era. Many who traverse these trails emerge shaken, with the disorienting impression that they have been gone far longer than their bodies allow. Some insist the trail has shown them moments of their own lives that were unresolved, regrets and fears manifested as physical obstacles on a twisting road that will not release them until they acknowledge them. Haunted roads often serve as conduits between worlds, bridging the living with the dead. In Scotland, folklore tells of travelers who glimpse spectral coaches passing silently in the fog, the faces of passengers pale and frozen, glimpsed only from the corner of one's eye. Some reports describe shadowy riders who turn to acknowledge the living, yet vanish before any response can be made. These encounters suggest a liminality to these road spaces, not confined by ordinary time, where spirits roam freely, and the boundary between reality and memory is tenuous. Locals have long warned against traveling alone at night, citing not only the risk of the supernatural, but the psychological weight of walking where the dead linger. The vanishing aspect of these trails adds to the mystery. In France, the Chemin des Perdus, the Path of the Lost, is notorious for appearing suddenly in foggy meadows or along wooded hillsides. Travelers often report starting down the path with clear intention, only for it to bend, twist, or fade entirely, leaving them standing at the edge of the same field from which they began. Objects along the way, a broken cart, a leaning signpost, or a discarded lantern, may reappear in different positions or vanish altogether, reinforcing the sense that the trail itself is not bound by natural law. Some witnesses swear that repeated attempts to follow the same road yield different experiences each time, as if the path is aware of the traveler and alters its course accordingly. Natural elements contribute to the haunting. Fog, mist, and darkness are nearly constant companions along these roads, but they behave unnaturally. Shadows bend against the wind. Tree branches reach across the road as if to block progress, and distant sounds, the creak of wheels, the clip-clop of hooves, faint singing appear without source. Animals behave oddly. Dogs howl at nothing, birds fall silent, and livestock stare motionless toward empty spaces. These phenomena reinforce the idea that the environment itself participates in the haunting, shaping perception, and magnifying fear. Many haunted roads intersect with local history in a tangible way. Sites of old inns, execution grounds, and battlefield routes are particularly prone to vanishings. In England, the lane connecting two villages along a medieval trade route has long been associated with travelers who disappeared. Some locals claim that the road remembers those lost, and on certain nights, the footprints of the vanished appear in the mud, only to dissolve moments later. Stories describe ghostly coaches moving silently along the lane, sometimes carrying travelers who never existed in the physical world, yet whose images are remembered in village chronicles. The interplay between haunted roads and cursed journeys is also profound. Roads often serve as the stage for phantom carriages and headless riders, creating layered experiences of supernatural activity. A traveler may encounter a vanishing trail first, only to be pursued or accompanied by a spectral coach or a rider from local legend. These encounters reinforce the road's status as a liminal space, a realm where multiple stories converge, and where the living and the dead brush against each other in ways that defy ordinary understanding. Psychologically, these roads challenge perception, memory, and orientation. Travelers often report a sense of being watched, subtle dislocations in time, and encounters with phenomena that feel simultaneously real and unreal. Some describe repeated experiences of the same trail in dreams or visions, as if the road continues to exist in consciousness, even when the body is elsewhere. In this way, the haunted road extends beyond physical geography, becoming a space of liminal experience that lingers in memory long after the traveler has returned to ordinary life. Haunted roads leave impressions that linger long after the traveler has returned to familiar paths. Some who survive these experiences speak of a persistent awareness, a subtle tension whenever they approach crossroads, forest edges, or even empty fields. The memory of vanishing trails haunts their senses, the flicker of a lantern in fog, the echo of hooves on distant cobblestones, or the whisper of a voice calling a name that may not exist. These echoes suggest that the haunted road does not release its travelers entirely, binding them to the experience in ways that defy explanation. In parts of Ireland, legends describe the Side Lana, or full paths, where travelers may step onto a trail only to find themselves journeying through an otherworldly landscape. Along the way, they encounter figures from various eras, a soldier from a centuries-old battle, a merchant who vanished decades prior, a child carrying a lantern. These figures rarely interact overtly, but their presence is felt profoundly, a silent reminder that the road carries memory as surely as it carries footsteps. Travelers describe a sensation of time dilating, moments stretching into hours, hours collapsing into seconds, and a constant awareness that they are not merely walking, but participating in the echoes of countless journeys before them. Some roads are haunted in cycles, appearing only on specific nights or under particular conditions. In Germany, the Mondweg, or Moon Road, emerges only when the moon is full or partially obscured by mist. Those who traverse it report a sequence of experiences that shift depending on their own choices, fears, and intentions. A traveler who moves confidently may find the path straight and quiet, while one who hesitates may encounter bends that fold back on themselves, spectral obstacles, and figures who vanish when approached. In these legends, the road is as much a test as it is a journey, reflecting the inner state of the traveler, while imposing the rules of a realm beyond ordinary comprehension. Haunted roads also carry a profound sense of moral memory. Villagers often recount stories of travelers punished for arrogance, disrespect, or recklessness, while those who show humility or caution emerge with only a lingering sense of awe. In Scotland, a path through the Highlands was said to punish those who mocked the dead, disrupted ancient markers, or ignored the guidance of elders. Travelers who encountered the road in such a state were often found days later, disoriented and shaken, or in some cases never found at all. These tales reinforce the belief that haunted roads are not random. They are spaces imbued with memory, vigilance, and judgment, where human behavior matters as much as the physical act of walking. The vanishing aspect of these trails often intersects with physical landmarks, bridges that appear and disappear, ancient walls that shift, and cottages that vanish entirely, create an environment that defies navigation. In France, the chemin de brume, or misty path, is notorious for its illusions. A traveler may follow a faintly visible road through fog, only to find it folding back upon itself. The landscape is alive, shaped by forces beyond human perception, and travelers often report glimpses of figures at the edges of vision, a rider on horseback, a shadowy coachman, or a procession of ghostly travelers moving silently alongside. Animals are often sensitive indicators of these haunted roads. Horses may refuse to step forward, dogs may whine or run off, and birds may fall silent as the traveler moves through the path. Some stories describe herds of cattle or flocks of sheep appearing unnaturally still, watching the road with unblinking attention, as if sensing the presence of forces beyond mortal understanding. These subtle cues add to the tension and mystery, reinforcing the notion that the environment itself participates in the haunting, shaping perception and experience. Across continents, similar experiences recur. In the Appalachian Mountains, hikers speak of trails that vanish behind them, mist rising in unnatural patterns, and ghostly figures flitting at the edges of the forest. In Japan, legends describe the Kaiden no Michi, spectral roads where travelers may glimpse ghostly processions or feel the presence of spirits who have walked the path for centuries. Despite cultural differences, the patterns are consistent. The road itself seems alive. Time bends and stretches, and the traveler is tested, observed, and occasionally guided by forces beyond comprehension. Haunted roads are often interwoven with other supernatural phenomena. Phantom carriages, headless riders, and cursed journeys frequently intersect with these trails, creating layered experiences of the otherworldly. A single road may host multiple legends, from vanished travelers to ghostly coaches to spectral figures walking silently alongside the living. This convergence creates a complex tapestry of fear, memory, and unseen forces, leaving travelers both awed and unsettled, aware that the world they perceive is only a fraction of what exists beyond the veil. Ultimately, haunted roads and vanishing trails serve as reminders that not all paths are meant to be traveled lightly. They test courage, patience, and awareness, carrying echoes of the past while shaping the experiences of the present. For those who traverse them, the journey is transformative, a glimpse into a liminal space where memory, history, and the supernatural converge. The road may vanish, the lanterns may fade, and the shadows may retreat, but the impression remains, etched into the consciousness of anyone who has walked where the living and the spectral intersect. The stories of ghostly carriages and headless riders have persisted for centuries, not simply as tales meant to frighten, but as phenomena that challenge understanding, inviting us to question the nature of reality, time, and memory. Scholars, folklorists, and paranormal researchers have long debated why these spectral riders appear, how they move so effortlessly through mist and night, and what purpose they serve. Across cultures, similar patterns emerge, suggesting that these apparitions are more than imagination. They are echoes of something that lingers just beyond the perception of the living. One of the most widely held theories is that spectral riders are the residual energy of tragic events. Where sudden death, battle, or betrayal has occurred, the land itself seems to retain the memory of those who suffered. In England, battlefields from the medieval period are notorious for headless riders appearing in the fog, often reenacting moments from their final hours. Witnesses describe seeing the same riders appear, vanishing and reappearing along the same stretch of road, as if time is looping for them. These residual apparitions do not interact with the living beyond fleeting glances or the passing of hooves. They are thought to be tied to the event itself, unable to move beyond the imprint left on the landscape. Another theory suggests that these riders serve as warnings or omens. In parts of Germany, sightings of headless riders are linked to impending disaster or misfortune. Locals recount tales of families who saw a rider pass their home on a moonless night, only to experience tragedy in the following days. The riders are silent messengers, bound to the mortal realm not for vengeance, but to deliver a spectral signal of events yet to unfold. In these interpretations, the riders are less malevolent entities and more guardians of the thin boundary between fate and choice, bridging the known and unknown through their fleeting presence. Some folklorists propose that spectral riders are connected to the liminal nature of roads and travel. Crossroads, forest paths, and abandoned trails are spaces of transition where the ordinary rules of reality loosen and the unseen can manifest. A rider may appear to travelers who are alone at night, particularly those in states of vulnerability, fatigue, fear, or grief heighten perception and allow glimpses of things that normally remain hidden. In Ireland, the CDA riders are thought to appear to those crossing thresholds between the human world and the other world, signaling that the traveler is passing through a zone where spirits and time intersect. The rider, then, is not random but a sentinel, a being whose presence marks a liminal passage. In France, there is a particularly intriguing theory connecting spectral riders to historical carriages and modes of travel. Researchers note that in rural regions, sightings often correspond to roads long abandoned or routes that existed during times of plague, war, or famine. The theory holds that the riders are echoes of human activity, imprinted on the land itself like recordings etched into stone or mist. People riding coaches, horses, or carts centuries ago may have left behind residual energy, repeating their motions in the night for eternity. Witnesses are not seeing the original rider, but the imprint of that motion, replaying like a spectral echo triggered by the presence of a modern traveler. Some paranormal theories suggest a more metaphysical explanation. Spectral riders might be manifestations of collective human memory, shaped by fear, loss, and cultural storytelling. These figures appear consistently across different countries, eras, and landscapes, often following patterns that cannot be explained by coincidence. Researchers argue that these apparitions exist in a shared psychic or astral plane, visible only to those attuned to subtle energies. The headless riders, phantom carriages, and vanishing travelers may then be interpreted as symbols of mortality, unfulfilled journeys, and the lingering power of human consciousness. Certain sightings suggest that these riders have an intelligence, guiding, avoiding, or observing the living. In parts of Scotland, travelers report headless riders appearing along misty moors, halting briefly to watch before disappearing into the fog. The rider seems aware of human presence, timing movements to avoid direct confrontation, yet ensuring visibility. Some theorists suggest this intelligence is tied to a ritualistic or karmic function, maintaining balance between the living and the dead. The headless figure, specifically, may represent the disconnection of identity from corporeal life, a visual metaphor for the consequences of violence, betrayal, or unfinished business. Other theories draw from folklore and superstition, interpreting spectral riders as psychopomps entities that guide souls from the mortal plane to the afterlife. In Italy, the Cavalieri Fantasma, ghostly knights or riders, are said to escort spirits along the roads, particularly those who died suddenly or without ceremony. These entities are not malevolent, but perform a necessary duty, visible only to those who are sensitive to their passage. In some accounts, travelers inadvertently witness these processions, catching a glimpse of souls in transit, reminding the living that death and the afterlife are woven into the same landscapes we inhabit. Cultural interpretations also influence sightings. Headless riders, for example, appear in England, Germany, and parts of the United States. Yet their appearances often carry local significance. In colonial America, travelers along isolated backroads reported spectral figures on horseback, sometimes dressed as soldiers or pioneers, associated with roads that had seen tragedy, attacks, or disease. Folklorists suggest that these figures embody the collective anxieties of a community, crystallizing fears of violence, isolation, or mortality into a visual form. A more modern theory considers the possibility of interdimensional phenomena. Some researchers propose that spectral riders may be glimpses of parallel realities intersecting with our own. The riders appear suddenly, move in ways that defy physics, and vanish without trace, characteristics consistent with the idea of fleeting breaches between dimensions. In this interpretation, the roads themselves, especially haunted or vanishing trails, act as thin points where the veil between worlds is weaker, allowing observers to witness fragments of lives or events from alternate planes of existence. The interdimensional theory also helps explain the consistency of certain patterns in rider sightings across continents and centuries. Despite differences in culture, landscape, and era, witnesses report remarkably similar details: the soft clatter of hooves, the presence of a hooded or headless figure, a phantom carriage moving in silence or with unnatural speed, and the sudden vanishing of the apparition. If spectral riders are indeed glimpses of alternate realities, these consistencies may indicate that certain archetypal images recur across planes, manifesting in ways the human mind can perceive when conditions are favorable at night, along isolated roads, or in moments of heightened emotion or vulnerability. Some sightings suggest a temporal aspect as well. Riders may appear frozen in moments of history, reenacting a single act, repeatedly: a gallop across a misty moor, the raising of a sword, the tilt of a lantern. Observers are often left feeling as if they are witnessing a ghostly film, a fragment of a life preserved outside the normal flow of time. In folklore, this has been described as a residual haunting, a phenomenon in which energy or memory imprints itself on a location, replaying indefinitely until released. Unlike interactive ghosts, these riders do not communicate or respond, but remain locked in their temporal loop, visible only to those who pass along the same roads. Another perspective comes from psychology and collective consciousness. Some researchers theorize that spectral riders are projections of deep-seated fears: the fear of death, the unknown, or being lost, amplified in moments of solitude or darkness. Roads, trails, and isolated paths become psychological triggers, where the mind, influenced by cultural stories and personal anxiety, manifests these archetypal figures. The shared consistency of the sightings may be explained by common human experiences, fears, and imaginations, particularly when reinforced by folklore passed through generations. In this sense, the rider exists both in the external environment and in the internal landscape of the observer. Religious and spiritual interpretations also abound, In many European traditions, headless riders symbolize those who died violently or without proper rites. Their unrest anchors them to the mortal plane, forcing them to continue wandering, sometimes in search of justice or closure. In some accounts, these riders act as warnings to travelers, reminding them to respect sacred ground, adhere to local customs, or heed omens. The headless form represents disconnection, a life interrupted, or an identity stripped away, serving as a visual emblem of the consequences of unresolved conflict. Folklorists have noted that spectral riders often appear at threshold moments, the end of a road, the edge of a forest, or the beginning of a moor. These spaces are culturally and psychologically recognized as liminal, zones of transition where the ordinary rules of life and time are suspended. The rider, in this context, embodies the crossing itself, a guardian or sentinel of the boundary between known and unknown, life and death, reality and memory. Travelers encountering such riders often report heightened awareness, a sudden clarity or dread, and an understanding that the space they occupy is not ordinary. In North America, similar accounts emerged despite the continent's relatively short colonial history. Back roads, forests, and abandoned trails carry tales of riders dressed as soldiers, pioneers, or anonymous figures whose faces are obscured. These sightings often coincide with areas marked by tragedy, disease, or violent conflict. Folklorists suggest that the tales were adapted from European settlers' memories and fears, merged with the new landscapes they encountered, and reinforced by subsequent generations. The patterns remain consistent. A rider appears suddenly, moves silently or with unnatural sound, and vanishes before direct interaction can occur, leaving an indelible impression on the observer. Another theory links the riders to natural phenomena misunderstood by humans. Some skeptics argue that shadows, mist, reflections of moonlight, and distant animal movement may combine with the observer's expectations to create convincing apparitions. While this does not explain every detail, such as reported physical interactions, footsteps, or the presence of residual sounds, it may account for some sightings, particularly those along roads with uneven lighting, fog, or dense forest cover. This perspective does not diminish the power of the stories. Rather, it highlights the complex interplay between environment, perception, and cultural storytelling in producing the legend of the spectral rider. The recurring motif of headlessness is particularly fascinating. Some suggest it is symbolic, representing death, anonymity, or the loss of the self. Others see it as a manifestation of violent ends, where the rider continues their journey uncompleted, their mortal identity stripped away. In folklore, this motif resonates with the universal fear of incomplete passage of life interrupted, journeys unfinished, and messages unspoken. The headless rider becomes a cautionary emblem, a reminder of mortality, and the tenuous thread between existence and oblivion. Some theories posit that spectral riders may also serve as cultural memory, embodying collective fears and historical trauma. Wars, plagues, and violent crimes leave deep marks on communities, and the riders may be visual manifestations of these accumulated energies. Villagers in rural France and England have long told of seeing a procession of headless riders on fog-laden nights, often along routes where battles or executions took place centuries prior. The apparition serves as both a warning and a memorial, a bridge between the living and the dead, reminding travelers that history leaves echoes in the landscape itself. The spiritual dimension of these riders also suggests a function beyond mere haunting. In Italy, the Cavalieri Fantasma are sometimes viewed as psychopomps, guides of souls between life and death. Travelers who glimpse them may unknowingly witness a passage of spirits who were unable to complete their mortal journey. In this sense, the riders are neither malevolent nor random. They fulfill a cosmic purpose, bridging the mortal world with the afterlife. Those who observe these figures are given a fleeting insight into the unseen machinery of existence, a glimpse into a reality that humankind rarely perceives. Some modern researchers have attempted to catalog sightings in order to identify patterns. They note that riders often appear along isolated roads, at times of night when attention is heightened, and the senses are attuned to subtle changes in light and sound. They frequently manifest near crossroads, bridges, and ancient paths, which may serve as focal points for residual energy. Witnesses consistently report a feeling of being watched, of being measured against an invisible standard, followed by sudden disappearance of the apparition. These patterns, while difficult to quantify scientifically, reinforce the sense that spectral riders are not entirely random phenomena, but entities or echoes that interact with human consciousness in specific repeated ways. Psychologically, encountering a spectral rider can leave a lasting impression. Fear, awe, and curiosity intermingle, creating memories that feel both vivid and unreal. Many who witness these apparitions describe a heightened sense of perception, a clarity of awareness that persists long after the encounter. Some develop an obsession with roads, trails, and historical research, seeking to understand why they saw what they did. Others feel a lingering dread, particularly if the encounter occurred at a liminal location, such as a crossroads or abandoned lane. These psychological effects illustrate how deeply the legend of the rider resonates, influencing both imagination and perception. Folklore across cultures often depicts spectral riders as arbiters of fate. In England and Germany, stories describe riders who appear to those on the verge of critical decisions, offering an implicit test. Ignoring the warning can lead to misfortune, while respect and caution may allow the traveler to pass safely. These legends suggest that the rider is not merely a passive apparition, but an active participant in the moral and spiritual landscape, observing, guiding, and occasionally punishing based on the actions of the living. Interestingly, the motif of the headless rider appears across many cultures, each with its own interpretation. In European folklore, it often symbolizes an unfulfilled death or violent end. In colonial American tales, the rider represents unresolved historical trauma and the dangers of isolated wilderness travel. In each case, the figure serves as a liminal guardian, existing between the known and unknown, life and death, past and present. The headlessness emphasizes the universality of mortality and the fragility of human identity when confronted with forces beyond comprehension. Skeptics argue that many sightings can be explained through misperception, illusions, or heightened psychological states. Fog, moonlight, and distant movement can produce convincing illusions, especially in areas steeped in legend. Yet even accounting for natural explanations, the consistency of reports spanning centuries, continents, and cultures suggests that something more persists, a phenomenon tied as much to human consciousness as to the physical world. The riders endure in collective memory, carried through stories, eyewitness accounts, and folklore, embedding themselves deeply in cultural imagination. Ultimately, the spectral riders are a mirror, reflecting the deepest human fears and fascinations: mortality, the unknown, and the thin veil between life and death. Whether understood as residual energy, psychopumps, interdimensional phenomena, or manifestations of collective memory, they persist in our stories because they speak to the universal experience of encountering the mysterious and the uncanny. They remind us that the world is not solely composed of the tangible and visible. Some paths carry echoes of the past, and some riders are destined to traverse them long after the living have gone. For those who walk in the quiet of night, along isolated roads or foggy trails, the stories urge attentiveness, humility, and respect. The spectral riders may be watching, their hooves silent or echoing faintly, their lanterns flickering at the edge of perception. They are reminders of history, of the unseen, and of the journeys that continue beyond our comprehension. And so, as the night stretches on and shadows lengthen, the legend endures, whispered among travelers, remembered in folklore, and felt in the faint haunting echo of hooves along deserted paths.